Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Drive Your Business by Accelerating Forecast with Auto Prediction. This is Prasad Joshi, and I will be your host today, and I will try to cover this topic with some examples, some client requirements that I faced, and how did we use prediction planning to resolve those, and what are the shortcomings, the pros and cons, and how does auto predict comes into play with it. But before we get started, just a quick disclaimer. What you're going to see and hear and look is basically, it represents my work, does not constitute Oracle or any other, organization opinions in that. Just a quick introduction to Intrel. As such, Intrel doesn't need any introduction, but people who are new to the EPM industry, Intrel has been 5-time winners for EPM and Analytics Partner of the Year. It was also winner of 2019 Global and North America Partner of the Year. And the Intralites, as we call each other, who works at basically the Intrel company, we strive very hard and are always contributing to the ever-growing EPM industry. Either by publishing books, we have dozens of books on all these different topics, or creating blogs, or creating short educational videos on YouTube, which we typically call them as PIF, or paid forward videos. So we have our presence in pretty much all the different areas, print, web, and digital. So that's who we are. And based on that, we'll go to the agenda. So today's topic is mainly related to prediction by computers. How are we going to use our machines to do our jobs in a better, in a more instantaneous way? So that's where we have the predictive planning overview, and then we will cover different methods that Oracle has built into the predictor engine, and how they are used, and what can we do with it. Then next one is basically the usage of it wherever it's available. Whether it's available on web or Excel and things like that. We will also try to cover the pros and cons of it. And then from there onwards, we will go to the auto predict, which is which was released sometime earlier, a couple of months back, or a few months back. And then we will also see the requisites and availability of the auto predict, some use cases with it. And then how do we go about creating predictions based on the auto predict functionality. And then finally, also how to automate things in the auto predict area, and then use REST API and Groovy Business Rule to run auto prediction jobs from one pod into another and things like that. So the first one, prediction planning. So before I get started, many on the prediction planning, many clients use all different kinds of mechanisms to do their forecast and budget. Some clients use driver-based budget where they have few drivers, and then they basically keep updating that and calculations based on that. Some clients, they use rolling forecasts. They are constantly forecasting. They say we don't want to forecast from the current month to the end of the year, but we just want a continuous cycle of forecasts. So sometimes they do 12 months, 18 months, or 24 months of forecast in there. Many clients, they prefer to do a zero-based budget. So they say, we don't care, we don't want to know anything else. We just want to start right from scratch, no matter what my numbers were for the previous, forecast or budgets. And then there's, the recent one, which got a lot of traction, is also the scenario planning, where a senior management, they comes up with, 3-4 different, scenarios. And then they basically ask their team to create the budget based on those scenarios. So in the event, if one of those scenarios happens, then they already have a plan of action that they need to do. And they are ready to basically, cruise through that, that kind of scenario. Like a great example would be, the COVID scenario, where when the pandemic came in, if clients, whoever did some, that kind of scenario modeling, then they were able to, cruise through that pretty easily compared to others who were not ready for it. And then, in all these different kinds, and there are many more that I can go on, but I want to restrict it to here. But in all these different kinds of budgets, and forecasting methods that we have, they all rely on human intelligence. They have human intervention. So they look at the data. Humans come up with their own Excel models or offline models or any other models. They crunch the number through that, and then they basically creates the forecast. Um, Oracle came up with a different technology for that, and they said, okay, we're gonna give the prediction part, the analysis, the prediction part to the computers. So that's where the prediction planning comes in. By the way, this is not a new concept that is released. This concept has been there on the on-premise planning applications as well. So what is that? So it basically it's a computer predicts the forecast based on the historical data. It does a pretty good job of predicting 90% confident data interval with it. So it looks at the historical data for last couple of years or 3 years or more, and then it looks for all these different outliers, trends, seasonality, missing values. It looks at how the volatility of the data, and then based on that, it runs the built-in predictor engine, which has different stats method, which we'll cover in the later section. So it runs all of those things based on the historical data to produce the forecast. So over here, there is no human intervention needed. It's the engine does the whole work for you. When it creates the prediction, it can also provide you with the best case as well as the worst case. How does it help? So there is a question. I don't know if I will, I'm gonna ask. I will refer to the question later on. I just wanted to make sure that the question was not related to the audio or the visual part of it. But I will take all of the questions later on, and those kinds of questions will be answered as I go along. But to start with, so this actually helps a lot doing sanity check. So this also prevents sandbagging. So if some people are just sandbagging their budget, basically, when you do your prediction based on a computer, you can compare your forecast with the prediction. And if the variance is huge, you can ask them for commentary on that. It also provides you good charting options. So it could be real time, where you run the prediction real time and then have dashboards which will update your predicted data in a visual manner by line charts, column chart, bar charts, and all. It also gives you the ability to compare your current prediction with the past forecasts and past predictions. So a typical prediction planning process involves planners going into data form or grid in SmartView, and then they basically launch the prediction engine from there. And once the prediction engine completes its calculation, they will get all these different scenarios as you see on this chart over here on the slide. It will show them the base prediction. It will show the worst as well as best case. And then it will also show the actual data with it, or whatever the source they have used for their prediction. So it will show that. And then if need, if they want, they can choose any of those predicted scenario and paste those value into their forecast or budget. So if I as a planner, if I decide to use my base prediction in this case, I can simply paste that value into the data form and then make changes if need be, and save the button to send the data to the database. So that's easy. Need to create a form which is called a valid form, and I will go through the details of that. And then you need to set up your source and target and the mapping portions of it as well, to make sure that your source area is defined and how it will populate your target. And then users will open a forms on the web or the SmartView and click through it. So just a quick history on this. As I mentioned, this feature was available on premises planning application, but it was only available in SmartView. But with the cloud planning, Oracle brought this feature in the web part as well. So now with any of your standard as well as the EPM applications, enterprise, you will have this functionality available in web as well as SmartView. So let's go through a couple of the prerequisites that we need to set up. So the first being, is it not? Okay, there you go. So the first being the definition. So we'll need to set up the source. the intervals. So in this case, there are already pre-populated values in here, 2.5 and 7.97.5. Then they have bunch of other values that you can look around. You will define what is your prediction cube. In this case, I have defined financial framework as my prediction cube. And then my source cube is basically a reporting cube that I have, which is my reporting. So all these things that you see, the prediction cube, the reporting, like the source cube, that was, that functionality came in later. So when they launched the prediction planning in web with the cloud planning, this was not available. So you could only run the prediction within the cube itself. So you will select actual and working as your source within a cube, and then you will select your prediction scenario, and you would run that thing, prediction to the data form. So but this is something, like, just giving you the chronology on this that this is something that came earlier this year, where you could essentially pick up different cubes within the application to do your source to fetch the source historical data, and then create a prediction in the target prediction cube. One of the examples that I'm gonna go over on this is I was at a client site, and they had a bunch of KPIs. So those KPIs were ratios, which involves basically numerator and denominator. So they had, they came up with different trending methods, and they wanted us to, write business rules for them to trend. And they basically give them a smart list where they can select what method they want to choose for the trending, whether it could be 3 months average, last 6 months average, and so on and so forth, all those kinds of things. And then it would predict the future with it. And there were a few other complex methods as well, which involve more data and all. I spoke to the client, and I said, instead of developing a trend business rule, why not use the out-of-box functionality of prediction planning? So I set up the valid form from them, and I showed them how easy is it to just click the button and predict that. And those results, like what I have seen, for maximum amount of time, they have not edited anything that they received from the prediction engine. So whatever it gave them, it was sufficient enough for their forecast and budgets. But where did it help? So it helped in cutting down some development time. So if I had to create a business rule for all those trend methods, then I would have needed a week or something to do that. But with prediction planning, I don't need to do that. I can shorten that time. Plus, there is no issue of maintenance on the prediction planning. So as the requirement changes, you will need to change those trending business rules. But with prediction planning, since it's out of box, as Oracle gives more functionality into it, you don't need to maintain anything in there. You will just need to make sure that your sources are defined, and you should be able to keep using the same functionality again and again. So it essentially cut down your forecast time as well as the development time in there. So one of the example was the client, like this client, they like the functionality and they decided to use it. So soon they realized, and they came back with a question that, hey, this is great. It gives me everything that I want, but is there a way I can load my actuals, monthly actuals, and then basically run this right thereafter? Basically automated or something that can trigger this off. So when I come in, everything is ready for me to just utilize it or analyze it. I don't have to run anything. Unfortunately, at that time, we could not do any automation on the prediction planning. So even today, we can't run automations. It's driven through a data form in web or smart view. So human intervention is needed in that aspect. And they also need to save the data. But clients really like the functionality, and they were thinking of more. Another thing that we noticed which is one of the best practice of the EPM industry, that when you load data into planning, you typically, especially if you're using financial framework, you have a planned element dimension in there. So if you are using, the best practice says use the load member of that dimension to load the data, and then use the calculated member to store all the calculation results. So back in the time, predictive planning did not allow to map load into the calculated. So one of the requirement is you need to have data in the source region, and the prediction region should be the same as the source region, with the exception of scenario and version. So if I'm using actual working and load, my prediction area could be forecast and then working and then load member only. So there was that glitch over there, which we resolved by loading it into the calculated member itself and then using that. But another thing also came up at a different client, that they came up with a mapping issue. They said, is there any way that we can map a parent level member to a lower level member? So typically, one of the best practices in EPM is you want to create a ASO reporting cube where you can load a lot of actuals by a lot of details in there, and then have a summarized cube for your budget and forecast. So in this case, they had a division dimension and they had a bunch of divisions in there, but they were not doing budget or forecast at the each division level. They were just choosing one division out of those out of the roll up. So we couldn't do any of those things back in the time with the prediction planning. So excuse me. So a typical scenario in that case would be to create a different scenario and then copy the mining division into the division 1300, and then manufacturing value into division 2100 by a business rule, and then use that scenario for your prediction. But so that was one of the shortcomings, which we'll try to cover and see if AutoPredict fulfills that. So these are all real-time scenario that came up, and we were not able to achieve all of those things through out of box. So we had to tweak few things here and there to get the predictive planning working. So that's where all those things fall into. And then also make another important thing, which is a prerequisite, is make sure that whatever source value that you are taking, make sure that you have enough data in there. Typically, I would recommend at least 2 years of data for the historical pieces. So in this case, if you're using actual working, make sure that there is data. Similarly, if you're using the load member, to do the prediction, make sure that it has data and not anywhere else. In this case, as the prediction planning functionality developed, Oracle started giving you more point of views in there. So now, along with scenario and version, you can define one more map in there. So typically, I could define the load member from financial element, because that's where actuals are getting loaded. So I could load that. I could use actual working and load as my source, and then I can create the prediction and store it in forecast working and the calculated member. So that functionality evolved earlier this year, and we are now able to do that. However, we are not able to do multiple mappings with the predictive planning. We'll cover that later on. So a couple of things just to make sure that historical data is available for that POV, and make sure that the scenario that you are predicting to is editable on the form. Otherwise, although the prediction data is pasted, it's not gonna, if it's read only, it's not gonna do anything for you. So moving on to the next one, the valid form. So valid form is nothing but a typical data form. It needs to have a series axis. So what is a series axis? Series axis could contain, it doesn't contain the time dimension. So it could contain a dimension like account, your products, scenario, and all. And then it would also contain another axis that it contains is the time, where it would have period or year or both of them. The scenario and version could be on either of this. So the dashboard that I have, the data form that I have showed you is a valid form in here. So typically, users will come in, open the data form from the navigation flow or the data card, and then they will go into the action menu and run the prediction in here. And once they run the prediction, Oracle, basically the predictor engine, creates the chart, which is shown in the bottom of the screen. It shows all those different prediction scenarios that they have, the best case, worst case, then the main prediction. Then if you have any variances in their scenarios, it could do that, linear trend, growth, all those things, whatever you have configured, it can do all those things in there for you and show it to you. So that way, and I usually prefer to see my data in a more visual manner rather than grid, like a tabular manner, because I can read the numbers just fine, but looking at the lines or the chart, it helps me understand the data in a better way. So with this, charting type, it allows users to, visualize the data and understand it in a better way. And then based on that, basically they can click the hamburger, which is shown by this red arrow over here. They can click on that to modify the different scenario cases that they have. So it will open up a window, and then you can click on the chart view, which is right up here, and it shows all those different scenarios that are listed in here. You can check the box or uncheck the box to exclude and include. And then you could also click on the date ranges, which allows you to select the historical periods as well as the prediction period. And once that is done, then you can essentially click the button next to it to paste that data, the prediction data, and you can choose what scenario you want to. So you could select your main prediction, base case, as well as worst case. You can do that into the form. And then you can tweak the number, adjust the number as needed, and then save the data in the database. So that's pretty much the prediction planning flow. The same process could be done in the Smart View as well. But before you could use this functionality in Smart View, you will need to install an extension. To install that extension, go to your home page or the main navigation flow and click the menu right next to your username, and then select downloads from there. It will pop up another window, and then click the download icon in the predictive planning section. It will ask you for your Oracle username and password, and then it will install the predictive planning extension for you. And once it's done, it should be available in your Excel. But before you can use that, you need to set up the predictive planning in Excel, which is the same process that you went over through the web. Once you click the setup prediction, it launches this new box. Here you could define the data source, historical periods. You could also map the name, so you could select what scenario you want as as your basis, and then where the prediction happens. And then you could also select the different options in here. So these are all related to the methods that engine uses. So essentially, the forecasting methods could be divided into non-seasonal methods, seasonal method, ARIMA, and seasonal ARIMA. I'm just going to go briefly over them because it's not going to be possible to cover all of them. Oracle has done a very good job in documenting those, so feel free to Google that. You should be able to get that document. But if you want to play around with the methods, then you can check the boxes here and there and see the prediction. Also, this data attributes, you can play around with it, but main thing is do this only if you're good at stats and you're able to understand all those things. Otherwise, the default should suffice. For a person like me, I don't understand statistics that much, so I would leave that as is, and it will just work fine for me. But try that out to see how it varies for you and what different results you get, and play around with it. So it's all about learning and see if it, checking one method over the other gives you better result or not. So these are all the methods. Let's go through the methods really quickly. So as I said, there are basically 3 types of methods. The first one is non-seasonal. So there are 12 methods, but I have listed only a few of them. The non-seasonal methods are essentially good for volatile data that does not have any seasonality, as the name indicates. The seasonal methods, on the contrary, are good for volatile data with seasonality. Let's go through each of them real quick. So the single moving average, which is a non-seasonal forecasting method. What happens in there, the calculator engine calculates the average for the historical data series, and then it takes the last last average value and moves it forward. So essentially, it creates a flat line forecast for you. This kind of method is useful for volatile data where you have a lot of up and down, and it doesn't have any trends or seasonality into it. The next one, double moving average, as the name suggests, it does the average twice. So it uses the seasonal moving average first on the original data, so all historical time series, and then it will create the results for that, and then it will do the average on the results of the single moving average, and then it will basically produce the forecast periods for you. So this also creates basically a slope line forecast, good with volatile data with certain trends in it. The next one is basically single exponential smoothing. So over here, a lot of weighting is done. Basically, it basically weights all of the past historical data, exponentially decreasing towards the past. So your most current will have higher weights. And then this method is typically, again, useful for volatile data with no trends. And this also, similar to the single moving average, it produces a flat line forecast. Double exponential does the exponential, smooths the data twice, similar to double moving average. It creates the same slope line forecast, and it's essentially good for volatile data with no seasonality but trends. Moving on to the seasonal side, so seasonal forecasting methods are essentially everything that non-seasonal forecasting methods are, plus they add seasonal component into it. So for seasonal additive, the first thing that it does, it basically calculates the seasonal index for the historical data, and then it basically takes the exponential smoothing method from there and then adds the seasonal index to it. Seasonal multiplicative is essentially the same, but instead of adding the seasonal index, it multiplies it. So both of these methods produces, it reproduces the seasonality of the data in future months. The Holt methods and additive and multiplicative, they're essentially the same. They calculate the seasonal index, plus it also looks at the trends and applies the trends to the exponentially, the forecast data calculated through the exponential methods. So there are three different things that comes at play, and then it produces those trends and seasonality in future months as well. So for additive, it adds the seasonal index. For multiplicative, it multiplies the seasonal index, whatever it's calculated, multiplies that with the trend and the smoothing part of it. So both of those methods, they basically creates those seasonality in future, and essentially they are good for volatile data or data with good seasonality in there. The ARIMA, which is it correlates your current time series to the past data and also includes and then brings in the moving averages with it, and that's how it produces the data for it. So what happens when the prediction engine runs? So we went through some of these methods, right? So if I'm a planner, if I select one product and 10 accounts on a data form, and if I ran that predictive planning, Oracle behind the scene is going to run all of these methods for those 10 accounts for that particular product. So it will calculate the forecast results for all of them. And then it calculates the root mean square error value for each of those methods. And then it calculates what is my lowest error value. So whatever the lowest error value is, it takes that method results as the main prediction, and then basically calculates the best case as well as the worst case from the distribution there onwards. So all of those things are done when the planner clicks the prediction button in the form. There is no control on this method. So as a developer or an administrator or the planner, I cannot control what method I can run. So if I wanted to just run the single moving average and not run anything else, I cannot do that. It's all done behind the scene. We don't have any control on that. Basically, it runs the non-seasonal and the ARIMA method first, and then if the values doesn't fit the non-seasonal part, then it will introduce the seasonal methods into it. But all those things is done behind the scene, and then it produces the result for it. So it's very instantaneous. It's very fast, but again, you don't have any control on those methods. So once you are ready to run the prediction in SmartView, once you click the predict icon, it will give you a run confirmation box where it gives you another chance to update the periods or the members that you want to do, that you're using. If you don't want to update anything on the screen, simply click run, and it should complete the prediction and then give you any errors or warning. And it will also give you the chart with the prediction values in it, with the main prediction, best case, worst case, whatever you have selected for. So it will give you all that stuff in there. You can then paste those values in the prediction scenario, edit them, and then basically submit that to the database. So essentially, the process is pretty much the same in the web as well as SmartView. SmartView, you have a few more things that you can choose, but that's pretty much on how you do that. So let's do a quick roundabout pros and cons. So the best thing about prediction planning is it gives power to the planners. So they don't have to create all these offline models or anything like that. They can just run through the data form and get their results. It's very fast. It's almost instantaneous. Like as soon as they click the button, the results will be given that way. Will be given right away. So that way, it will be able to reduce the time that planners need to come up with the data. Also, like in some cases, like as I said, if client wants certain complicated methods, you can suggest using predictive planning and cutting down essentially some development time as well. It's available in web as well as SmartView, and planners will need to basically save the data, or they have the adjustment piece in there. So if they can take the data as is and then adjust if need be, and then submit the data to the database. The shortcoming or the cons of those predictive planning are administrator needs to set up a valid form for you. So the data form needs to be set up. And another thing is it cannot be enforced. So there is no way you can mandate all the planners to use that. Planners may still decide to use their own method, because this is not like since it's run by the planners, there is no way to control that. That brings up another point. It cannot be automated. So planners physically have to open up the form, run the prediction, save the data. So it cannot be automated. And then another part is, which is the actually saving the data into the database. So that's another special click that they have to do if they want to save the data into the system. So let's see if AutoPredict can bridge this, shortcomings that predictive planning has. So moving on to the next one, AutoPredict. So AutoPredict was released recently. It's part of the intelligent performance management suite part. So what AutoPredict is? AutoPredict is pretty much everything that predictive planning is, plus more. So what are those more things? So whatever the shortcomings that we looked at the predictive planning, for example, running it through the grid. We don't need a grid to run AutoPredict. Predictive planning cannot be automated. We can automate AutoPredict. Certain kinds of mappings are allowed as well. So you will need to set those up, but you can do all those mappings in there and then run it in a more automated scheduled job manner, right? And then you could schedule them one at a time, or you can run multiple prediction. You can define multiple prediction and have them run all at a time. The last piece, the last point of it is using a ASO cube. This is available for your prediction planning as well. But AutoPredict allows you to use your reporting cube as the source cube for your prediction as well. So all these features are available. Let's go through each of them, and see how the mapping, especially the mapping, helps in making the predictive planning a little bit better, right? So first thing is, who can use the AutoPredict? Essentially, customers who have the standard as well as the enterprise, EPM, they can all use it. But with the standard contracts, clients will need to upgrade their BSO application to hybrid mode. Only hybrid BSOs are allowed or are able to use the AutoPredict functionality. So there is typically a process to convert your BSO applications into hybrid. You will need to create a SR. You'll need to create an SR with Oracle, and then they will help you with the the steps and guide you through the instructions through all of that. It usually takes like few days to a week to complete that process. So keep that in mind, the timeline of it. You could run AutoPredict on custom plan types or your frameworks or module as they are called now. It works with the standard time periods, or if we have alternate time periods, it could work with that as well. Let's do a quick comparison between predictive planning and AutoPredict and see where do we stand after that. So the first thing, both of this, they are based on the same predictor engine. So it has the same built-in time series statistical techniques that predictive planning has. So it uses the same method that we went through, the single moving average, double moving average, exponential methods, cold winters, additive, multiplicative arima, and seasonal arima. So all those methods are pretty much the same that are used by both of those predictor engines. For predictive planning, we need grids. Autopredict doesn't need any grids. Predictive planning, so as it's run through a grid, if you have chosen one product and 10 accounts, so when you run the predictive planning, it's going to process only that product and 10 accounts for that product. It's not going to process anything else in there. So if a planner is responsible for 5 entities, 5 products for each of those, then they will need to either set that up on the form so they can do it in one shot, or they will need to do it in multiple iterations. Whereas AutoPredict, you can just define the prediction areas, and then you can essentially run it for hundreds of thousands of rows, at a time in needed. So there is no restriction on that front. Next one is there is no automation available with the predictive planning, but with AutoPredict, you can create a schedule job. You can automate that through the schedule job. You can use Groovy and REST API, which I will cover a little bit later on, to automate that as well, or do cross-port pods, runs as well. With predictive planning, planner has to click the save button to save the data into the system, whereas with AutoPredict, there is no click needed at all. And then the last one, predictive planning can be used on hybrid versus non-hybrid cubes, but with the AutoPredict, it's only available for the hybrid-enabled BSO cubes. Typical use cases where I have used them is, the first and the foremost is the budgeting part. Like as I was mentioning with my client where I use the predictive planning, they came back and say, hey, it gives us everything that we want. Can we automate that? So I couldn't automate the predictive planning back in the time, but now I could. So I have reached out to the client and told them that, hey, you could essentially do this now. So this could typically work as a flow where you clear actuals, load actuals. You won't need a lot of aggregations as it's hybrid. And then once you are done with your actual calculations or adjustments, you can essentially run the AutoPredict jobs. So that way it will seed all the forecast and the budget scenario that you want with all this different best case, worst case, or just the simple main prediction method. So when as a planner, when I go in, I don't have to do the extra work in there. Now I can just look at the numbers, pick up the numbers that I want, or change the data as I need and go about from there. So essentially it could help with the seeding of budgeting and forecasting scenario. Also, one of the use cases that Oracle mentioned is essentially it could help customers prevent sandbagging. So many times, clients ask, like, how do we ensure that our analysts are not, just putting numbers in there? How do we know? So if you use auto prediction along with the forecast that you have, you can do a variance analysis on that. And if there is a big variance between them, then you can mandate a commentary, or you can ask them to lower that variance. So essentially trying to get to that, the prediction band area. So another thing, you could also use AutoPredict to basically forecast your sales number. As I was mentioning with my client, logistic company, they had a lot of operational KPIs to calculate their operational expenses. So you could essentially, predict those using the AutoPredict. One of my other client, which is a bank, they use prediction planning to calculate their loans and deposit accounts. So you could essentially do that. Also, office expenses, utilities, telephone expenses, all those things could be, forecasted through the prediction planning or through the AutoPredict. One of my retail clients recently, they were using basically a driver-based workforce, and they had certain packages in volume, which were used as a driver, to calculate number of hours and FTEs from there onwards. So essentially, they had trending methods, 3 months, 6 months averages, but that was replaced by AutoPredict. So it would take in the actual numbers and then predict the number of packages that they wanted. And then basically calculate the number of hours and FTEs based on that. And because of it's doing everything in an automation way, when the actuals are loaded, it will essentially cut down your forecast cycles times as well. A few couple of things. You can only use the auto predict with the hybrid enable modes. You make sure that your source cube, prediction cubes, all those things are set up. The members, the POVs, all those things are set up for your predictions. Make sure you have a good amount of data, because the more data you have, historical data, it will, the consistent data results that it will produce. As a best practice, they usually say that you should at least have twice the amount of historical data as the number of prediction months. So that's available on those, on the interface over there. You can easily pick up the prediction month as well as the historical months. And then another thing to keep in mind, that if you have less than 6 historical periods, then it's basically going to produce a flat line, and it's not going to bother to give you a fat line of best case scenario or the worst case scenario. So keep these things in mind, and when you are setting up the auto predict sections, and then all you have to do is set up the auto predict area. So let's go through that. So where do I access the auto predict functionality? To access the auto predict functionality, you go into basically your overview through application menu on the, through the navigator, and then basically click on the action menu in there. The last item over there is the auto predict. So once you click that, it will launch a new window, which will basically list all of the existing definitions that you have over there, or you can create new prediction definitions as you need. So let's walk through how the prediction definitions are created in there. So prediction definition could be created within a cube itself. So you can use a ASO or a BSO cube if you're trying to store the values within the application. If you are also allowed to do a cube to cube, so your source cube could be different than your prediction cube. So if you want to just do an internal prediction, then you can pick the cube that you want from the list. If you want a cube to cube, then you can basically click the cube to cube icon in there as well. So once you click on, and you can give the name of the prediction. In this case, prediction name is plan or forecast. You can give it a description as well. So over here, I'm going to choose a cube to cube example. So once I do that, the first thing that I need to do is define the source area. So first section I have is, what is my source cube? In this case, I'm using the reporting cube, which is my report, RPT. So I'm using that as the reporting cube. The next one is the historical years. So when you click on the historical years, it pops up a slider bar. So the minimum value is 1, maximum value is 5 years. So again, try to use at least 2 or 3 years of data in there. So you can slide that to to get what you want. From there onwards, you can define all of the POVs. Just for example purposes, I have just picking up one account scenario actual working, and then I have chosen basically all the functions in there. So make sure that you are basically using the level 0 members in there. If you're using the BSO cube, ensure that you're only using the store and the shared members. If you use a dynamic calc member, then it will save the prediction definition just fine. But when you run it, it's going to error out, and it will say that you used a dynamic calc member for it. So make sure that you don't use dynamic calc member. And then if you are using the ASO as the source, make sure that you are not using any members with MDX formula as well. So they need to be stored basically, or never share in there. Going into the prediction cube, so same thing, you will define your target prediction cube. I am using financial framework over here. So I chose that. It's the same account. Here, if I want, I could map this account to a different account, but I have chosen the same account in this case. My scenario is forecast, version is working. And now this is where this mapping comes in very handy. So remember one of my clients where they had a lot of details in the reporting cube, and then they want to basically use a higher level member for the budget and the forecast scenarios. So over here, I can actually physically do that. So on my source, I would select member as manufacturing, and then I would select on the target, I would select the member to be 2100 department. So the drawback to this is you will need to create multiple definitions like this. So if you have 10, 15 divisions like this, you will need to create all of those in there. But it will work just fine because you can map a parent level member to a lower level member in there. And then anything that anywhere where you have used the functions like lower, level 0 descendants and all, those are basically, they will map member to member in there. If there is no dimension map in the reporting cube, so if you have a dimension that exists in the prediction cube, but not in the source cube, then it will show up as unmapped at the bottom of the POV. So you can choose a member, basically the default member that you want your prediction to be. In this case, I have used calculated in here, but essentially I could set up the ways I wanted, and I could create multiple, one for like mining division, one for manufacturing division, and so forth. And once it's set up, it's just one-time activity. Once it's set up, then I can just keep running them as I need be. So it will do the prediction based on the higher level data, and it will give me the numbers at the lowest level. So one thing to keep in mind is when you are using the BSO as well as ASO cube, whatever, in either cases, make sure to use only store and never share member, because again, dynamic calc member doesn't store data because they are virtual member. They calculate when user requests it on a form or on a grid or report. And MDX formula works the same way. They will calculate and gives you the value. So those are not going to work. So make sure that you use only the never share and the store members. You can also use substitution member in here, and you can do like a parent level to one mapping in here as I have shown. You can, the only thing that is missing in this section is basically the period. So let's talk about the period dimension. So to the right side of the screen is basically the period selection. So there are two options to select periods. So one is basically saying I want to select specific periods, or the second method is to say scenario-based date range. So let's talk about the first method, which is specific periods. When you use that, you can define the start month and the start month and the start year. And then for the end period, either you can define specific periods, so end period and end year, or you can simply choose number of period and give a number in there between 6 and 48. 6 is the lowest in the default, whereas the 48 is the highest. So you could do that, and you can, as you see, you can use substitution variables in there as well. Another thing that you can do, the second option is the scenario based. So instead of using specific periods, you can use the scenario based rate range. And when you do that, you need to specify what scenario you want to use. And once you define that, it will figure it out what is the start and the end period for all those things. And then you could use that as the definition for the start period as well as the end period. So a couple of options in there. And once that is done, then you can add on to the best case as well as the worst case. Simply click to the right side of the icon. It will pop up the screen over here with worst case and best case. Do that, and then make sure you select different members for those two cases. When I was trying this functionality out in a few months back, by default I kept working version for one of those cases, and I couldn't see the data differently. And then when I looked at the definition, I realized that I was using the same member. So ensure that all different members, whether scenario or versions, are used over there, so that way you can consume the data differently and make analysis out of it. Once all you need to do thereafter is save the prediction definition. Once it's done, you're good to go. You can then automate this, schedule this, run it through the Groovy and all. So this is how it appears. Then you can essentially click on the action menu and click run, and it will basically run and show if it's completed. In the last run section over here, it will show whether it's completed with errors or completed. And you can click onto that section to get the details of it. Thereafter, to schedule it through the scheduler, you can basically navigate to the jobs card and click on the schedule job. Auto predict is listed as one of the job types, which is at the bottom. So scroll to the bottom on the left side over here, and select the auto predict. Once you select that, then you can define the start and the end periods or the frequency of how many times you want to run it, and then click on the next icon. Once you click on the next icon, then it will show you the list of all the schedules job that you have. You can pick up the one that you want and then click next, and then it will give you another box which will allow you to select a dimension for your auto prediction. This is called as pagination. So if you have a big dimension, you can choose that dimension to run as a pagination dimension in the auto predict, which will essentially spread that dimension into multiple threads and calculate it parallelly. So it will help with the performance of it. Excuse me. So you could define that, and then that's it. Save it, and it's good to go. So essentially, the workflow would be something: clear actuals, load actuals, run any other calculation needed for the actuals, and then run basically the schedule job thereafter, to calculate and seed your forecast. So that when user starts their forecasting cycles, everything is ready for them. They can just look at the data and start analyzing it. Once the data is available, they can consume it through data form, smart view, dashboard. Here I have just shown you the same, like I'm looking at utilities and supplies. I did a prediction for them. I have the best case, worst case, and the main prediction as well. And then the same thing is shown in the dashboard as well. So you could create a dashboard where you have data grid on the top, followed by the visualization of it. So as you plug in the numbers or change in the numbers, the graphs below, the chart below will change in as well. It's a great functionality, gives you a lot of insight that the tabular data doesn't provide. So I will highly recommend that to, for all my clients to use it. One of the interesting thing is the REST API. Let's go through that. So REST API, most of the people would know it. If you don't, consider that as think of REST API as a universal, mechanism where it allows two computers to talk to each other using the HTTP protocol. So it's a similar way as in, a web browser talks to the server. It basically needs a URL. You need to create a URL, send that information to the server. It accepts it, and then it will give you the response back. One of the good tools to do that is basically it's called Postman. It's a free tool. You can install that, and then Postman is a tool that allows you to test REST API calls. So you would create that URL and then put that in there, and then test it, and then whatever response you get from the server, Postman will show it to you in the body of it. So REST API can be used for a bunch of different things. It can be used to get the API version. It could be used with planning. It could be used with data management, PCM. You could use the REST API to find out what are the different jobs that you have. You can run different jobs like data management, load rules, business rules, rule sets, auto predict, merge slices, import slices, export slices, all those things that you can do. Basically, it will allow you to do all those things in there. But to use the REST API, the first thing that you need to do is create a connection. So navigate to your tools and then connection through the navigate button. Once you do that, it will pop up this window up here, and there are basically 4 selections for you. You can select the appropriate one that you need, or if you're not sure, just choose the other web service. That's what I've selected. And then you will basically give a name. In this case, I'm naming it as FS Jobs. And then the URL would be basically your planning URL. And then I'm saying I want the header and the content type to be JSON. So whatever the response I get, what I'm communicating with is basically in the JSON format, which is the JavaScript language. And then I'm giving my username and password. I put this domain name purposely here because it's important to include the domain name dot your username for authentication. Otherwise, it will many times it's not successful. So make sure that you include the domain name in there. Once that is done, save and close. Your connection is ready. So now let's go to the next section of the REST API. So for REST API, there are 4 calls that you can do. First one is the get. So get call will allow you to retrieve information from the server. Then the second one is the post, which will allow you to execute something on the server. Third one is the put, and the fourth one is delete. The put one allows you to update, and delete one allows you to delete it. So those are the four calls that you can do. So as I was mentioning, one of the things that you could do is find out the version of REST API. So let's do that. So let's construct the URL to find out the version. So the URL for that is, first of all, your your planning URL /res/ and then this is the Postman interface. So I am basically you're creating a new project there, and then in that you're selecting the get method or call, and then you are just pasting your planning URL /res/ and go into authorization. Make sure you provide the username and password along with the domain name in there, and then once you hit send, it will give you the data back. So it provides you, in this case, it provides you version 1, V1, V2, and V3. V1 and V2 are deprecated, so that's why I like scroll to the V3 part. As you see, the life cycle is active, so we all should use this version V3. Another thing to and keep in mind is this is case sensitive, so it needs to be smaller v, not capital V. And then excuse me. So you can use that information from the Postman to create your the bodies or the resources and all that stuff in there. So going back onto the URL, so URL has three main sections. So first section is your planning application URL. So we already got that through the connection. The next one is the version, which we got it through the Postman as well. We know that now version, V3 is the version that is used with planning. So if I want to run a business rule or an auto predict job or rule set, that's V3 is the version that I'm going to use. If I'm working with the data management, then I need to use V1 to run a load rule and things like that. There is a very good documentation available by Oracle on this. It gives you a lot of examples of how how to construct the URL, what should be the commands to execute for the specific jobs and all. So go to refer to that document. You can just Google it, REST API, EPBCS or Oracle, and it will bring you that document. I will highly recommend to go through that. That's how I figured out a bunch of things in there. Another, I do want to give a shout out to Ujjwala Maheshwari. She from Oracle. When I was trying to set up a data management and a business rule to run through Groovy and REST API, I had several issues, and she kept coming back to me saying that use first run it through Postman, get the the info that you need, and then go from there. So which was very useful. I ended up spending a good amount of time to figure that out before reaching out to her. So I will do the same thing. I will show you why Postman is very useful in constructing those URLs. So going back onto the three contents we have. First one is the URL of the planning. The second one is the version that we got. And then the third one is the resource part. So in this case, it basically, the first two main things are pretty much common, which will have just /applications, and then you will need to provide the name of the application. And then thereafter, what you want to do, whether it's you want to retrieve the job definitions or even whether you want to run any job. So if you want to retrieve job definitions, you would just say job definitions. But if you want to run a particular job, you would replace it with jobs in there. And so when I put all these things together, this is the URL that I get for it. So this is the first section is the planning URL /REST, because I'm doing a REST call, and then the version with it, and then the application, name of my application, and all I'm doing is retrieving the job definition. So once this URL is ready, then I can go into the Postman. I can put that in here, make sure that authorization is already done. And when I send the button, when I send this information out, it will give me the response in the JSON format over here. And if you look at it, it basically essentially gives you all of your jobs. It gives you rules, rule sets, auto prediction, all the things that you have defined in there, it will basically list out in here. So now, once you have the response back from the REST API, you can essentially copy this and create a body out of it. So this is what I'm doing. I'm copying that over here, and then I'm going to use that to create my Groovy business rule. So that's what I have here on this side, excuse me, as my payload body. So when I go to the Groovy business rule section, and this is just a simple Groovy, you can do a lot more than this. But over here, I am defining JSON response, which is of type HTTP response. I'm defining a dynamic variable called payload, and then I am basically putting the body of the function in here, the one that I got from Postman. I am taking that and putting it as the payload variable value over here, and then that's this last section is what I'm going to run to run the auto prediction. So I want to access the planning URL. It's in the connection side, so I'm going to say get connection, which is in application and operational class. So I'm specifying it as operation.planning.get connection. Name of the connection. This is all Groovy, by the way. This is not REST API. So all this section that you see is Groovy. I will specify the connection, so it will get the planning URL. And then what call am I making? Am I doing the get, post, or delete call? So I'm putting the post call in here, and then the remainder of it. So I have the rest, then version v3 application, name of the application, and this time, since I'm executing a job, I am just putting jobs in there. And then what kind of job do I want to run? I want to run this particular job, which is defined in here. So if I was running a rule, I would put the same thing over here. And if the rule had parameters like runtime prompts, then I would have one more option in here called parameters, and I can specify the value for those runtime prompts in there. So that's what I'm doing. So once you execute this business rule, it will run the auto prediction successfully. I have tested this code. It runs, it runs successfully. One thing to keep in mind with REST API is, and again, this is what I have encountered with client. I was running a business rule through REST API, through a data form and data maps as well. So when the users hit the save button, it would come back and say completed. So, but when I look at the job, it would be still running basically all those, the data maps and the business rule calculation. So it did not wait for them to finish. It just says, okay, the REST API call is made, my job is finished, completed successfully. So there is a way where you can make the main business rule wait for all the subsequent jobs to finish. So the way to do that is basically take this JSON response and figure it out, the job ID that is associated with this. And you can use Postman to do that. Once you find the job ID, then you can keep pinging the server for that particular ID. So whenever you get the status of one, I think 0, then it's completed successfully. And you can do some if and else in there, and after that, and keep pinging the server for it to wait. So that's how you could do that, and basically wait for the main, the subsequent business rule to complete. With that, concluding, auto predict is a great functionality, and I will urge all of my customers and everyone on this call to to give it a thought and and use it. It could cut down a lot of development time, as well as maintenance and all that stuff in it. And Oracle is constantly adding new functionality to that, as we saw with how predictive planning came from on-premises smart view to web, and now with more like source and prediction cubes, and then map POVs and all that stuff. It also speeds up your forecast cycle by seeding your forecast, and based on some pretty good statistical methods. It will allow your customers, or it will allow you to basically spend less time in creating the data and more time on analyzing it. And also it could be automated, so you can run multiple jobs from one part to another and things like that. We have few more webinar coming in later this later this month and few weeks. Please ensure to sign up for them. They have pretty good material that they will cover. And then the last sections is all these books. I know we are already over time, so I apologize. So the minimum amount is already, like I said, depending upon the number of periods, you should decide that. But keep at least 2 years. That's what I would try. The more the better, right? Then how fast it is it once you click the predict button? So it's almost instantaneous. It again depends upon number of intersection that it has to process. but it's pretty quick. And as you change the data, it will give you the results right away as well. So if you add on new methods for prediction and all, it will, like, new scenarios, it will give you right away. So it's not like you're gonna click it, go get a coffee. It's none of that. You click it, within few seconds, you should be able to get your results. The next question is, do we have to create separate prediction for each account members? So with the predictive planning, you could essentially run it for all of the intersections on the data form, or you can run it for the selected ones. So you have that option. With auto predict, I was just showing you the functionality of mapping. So you could essentially, like, do one account if need be, or you can do level zeros of the account. So it's your choice, and it will map basically the 0 level members from the source into the target. Just make sure that those are not dynamic calc members or members with MDX formulas in it. But you could do multiple accounts with predictive planning as well as auto predict. And then can we create one prediction for? Yes, you can create multiple accounts in there, as I answered. What's the use case for predictive if auto predict does everything? So auto predict is recently, that came up earlier this year. But before that, it was predictive. So you can seed, you can still seed your forecast and everything based on your auto predict definitions. And then if you don't want to define that, then you can have planners use predictive planning as well. So it may complement each other. It's not like one replacing the other. One is more of a automated process where everything can be done before planners starts forecasting. And one is they can also use one functionality during the forecast with the predictive planning. So there are different use cases, but essentially you can use both of them because it has the same engine. So you could use it the same way for that. How difficult is the process to convert BSO? It's not difficult at all. Oracle is pretty good in guiding you through that. So as I mentioned, you will need to create an SR. And once you create, they will tell you to do backups and everything in there. And then they will basically apply those patches to a test environment. And then they will ask you to make sure that you do thorough testing over there, make sure everything still works. Because there are a few things that you will need to, update once you enable the hybrid. So, for example, you will need to make parent of the sparse members and all as dynamic calc. So you would do all those things, and then once you are comfortable, and there are other things to keep in mind as well. That there is number of, there are limitations on the number of rules and the members and all. So, so work with Oracle on that and see. But it usually takes few days to a week to complete that process, and they are very helpful in getting that done, right? And I think those are the only questions I had. So I pretty much yeah, I pretty much answered all of them. So once again, thank you everyone for joining today's call. I hope it was informative. Thanks for your time and have a wonderful day ahead. Thanks and bye-bye.